Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show, Science Dispatch Podcast. My name is Cameron English, your host as always. Joined again, as I always am at this point, Dr. Chuck Dinnerstein, Director of Medicine at the American Council on Science and Health. Chuck, what's going on?
As I said, they are remodeling the bathroom, and between the jackhammer and the other equipment, it's been a lot of fun. But that's what it is.
Sounds very, very pleasant. I love the sound of a jackhammer.
Nothing more relaxing in the afternoon than the sound of them ripping up tile in the bathroom.
Yeah, I agree. Sometimes I just turn it on my headphones for no reason. Okay, obviously that's not true. But we've got a really interesting story, Chuck. This one is one you wrote a couple weeks back. This is called Trust Me, I'm an Expert, The Pandemic Parade of Pompous Professionals. That title has a very staccato-like bounce to it, and I enjoy it. So well done. Well done on just the cadence of the title. It's a good title and on all its own, but still. Let me read this introduction here, and then you take it away and explain what your point is here. So you write, in a world where experts are our go-to folks for solving everything, the COVID-19 pandemic exposed just how fallible these specialists can be. Despite impressive titles and years of experience, many experts were just as clueless as the rest of us, often with unwarranted confidence. A recent study delves into the uncomfortable truth. The more knowledge you think you have, the less aware you might be of your actual ignorance. Okay, shots fired. Dr. Dinnerstein, break down the study for us. What are they looking at, and then what did they find?
Well, I was drawn to the study because it was such a contrarian study about expertise, because we expect experts to know everything. And of course, there are examples of sometimes when that doesn't happen. The one that comes to mind would be talking about a Nobel laureate that was very big on vitamin C. That turned out to not be quite his area. And it's tough, I think, for experts to sometimes identify the boundaries of their knowledge. You know, I certainly can be accused of that since I write about medicine a lot more than I write about surgery. But I would figure it's a fuzzy boundary, and I should be allowed in. In any case, this was a study done in the Journal of Behavioral Decision Making, and it looked at what experts know and what experts don't know that they don't know. And so that's why I said it was kind of an interesting contrarian thing. And they began by talking about a more important question was, what exactly is an expert? And there is no good definition of what an expert is. And so we've adopted over the course of years several metrics to look at it. And those are the ones that they use. Professional degrees, years of experience, and performance on a specific, domain-specific kind of task. And interestingly enough, as I think back on it, a lot of the literature about health outcomes is really broken down along the lines of how long this physician has been in practice, so years of experience, or in terms of how many of these cases they have seen in the past. You know, the feeling in medicine is the more experience you have, certainly the more practice you had with an operation in surgery, the more proficient and you are, and the better outcomes you have. So that was kind of interesting in and of itself. But what they considered in addition to those three easily measured metrics was the question of the ability to know what you do not know. And to get at that, they asked experts as well as some non-experts questions on specific areas in the area of, let me take a quick look, see if I can remember where they were, climate, psychology, and investment. And what they found is, and this is why it was such a great contrarian thing, is that they found that experts had the same problem as non-experts, which has been summed up by the Dunning-Kruger effect. And that states simply that people with limited competence overestimate their abilities to know what the case is. And what they're showing in this instance is that even individuals with significant competence overestimate their abilities to know their boundaries of what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. They found that in these instances, it didn't matter what their years of experience were, their academic titles were, or anything else, that experts, just as non-experts, had a difficulty knowing the boundaries of what they know. And the reason that I was so interested in it is because I really think it gets back to a lot of the conversation going on around the COVID pandemic and what the experts knew, what they didn't know, what they did, what they should have done, and so on and so forth. And I think what we find is that in a lot of cases, experts were being asked or volunteered to speak outside of the realms of the knowledge that they had. And rather than express what they recognized as uncertainty, or what even worse was that they didn't recognize as uncertainty, they spoke with a certain halo of expertise that caused a lot of problems. I think that if they'd said early on, we have a vaccine, we think that it's going to help people out, we would have a lot less problems than saying we have a vaccine and you're not going to get COVID once you get it, which turned out obviously not to be the case. So I think that's why I brought the article forward. I thought it was interesting to see. Certainly as a expert in surgery, I have more often than not run up against that particular boundary. And I think that with age, I'm able to recognize the boundary a little bit more frequently than I did in my wasted youth.
So can you talk a little bit more about what is driving this? So I know you mentioned Dunning-Kruger, but more specifically, is it a matter of somebody committing, whatever it is, 8 to 10 years of their life to develop a certain kind of expertise, and having achieved that, which is no small task, of course, to earn a PhD or earn an MD, go through a residence and all that stuff. Does that imbue you with a certain level of confidence that is justified within your domain, but then when you step outside of the hospital or outside of the laboratory, you go, I could probably build a house. I'm a pretty damn smart guy.
No, that's the perfect example to use, because I took a year off after my internship and decided I was going to go build myself a geodesic dome in Vermont, because if you can take out an appendix, you can build a house. As it turns out, the skill sets are very, very different. And I spent an inordinate amount of time trying to build my geodesic dome. Now, luckily, Vermont does not have a lot of building codes, so that made it easier. But I would believe the term overbuilt is key to what went on. I can remember spending days with a device called a come-along, which is just a very fancy form of a pulley, trying to bring 20-foot-long creosote-soaked telephone poles up a hill so that I could then somehow figure out how to put them into the ground to build the dome on top of. So that was a perfect example of that. And I think part of the problem is that, and I can speak to it best as a physician, is, they always call you doctor. And everyone, or to a large degree, everybody at work is very deferential to your opinions. And I think that carries over in the rest of your life. It becomes like, they defer to me here, so it must be that my expertise is just is golden. And again, you've seen it with other examples of Nobel laureates that wander off. They're the best examples because they've already achieved the highest status of expertise that we might argue about. Linus Pauling did not do so well on vitamin C, and there are other examples. But I think that it comes from the fact that within your domain, you are deferred to and infrequently questioned, and that unfortunately carries over into other things. The other part of it is that, I think that my expertise is based upon what I was taught in school and my experience. And as it turns out, looking back now 40 years later, they lied to me throughout medical school. Very little of what was the case in medical school remains true. Just as a measure of how old I am, there was only 12 coagulation factors when I was in training, which we could barely manage, but we could remember all of them. But there's hundreds of them now, so there's just you have no shot. So I think that another part of the problem is in that teaching the old dog a set of new tricks, that we become very set in our ways of thinking about problems, and it's difficult at times to take a whole nother approach. Again, and I can use another example from that, is that I was trained as a classic vascular surgeon in open surgery, maximally invasive surgery. And I have a lot of experience in it and very good in it. And about halfway through my clinical practice, long after I had finished my training, angioplasty and stents and all these minimally invasive procedures came into being, and I was faced with the need to learn these skills or no longer have a practice, because open surgery was no longer an ascendancy. And I can remember very well being in an operating room, probably the place that I felt most comfortable, and being extremely uncomfortable doing these angioplasties, because we were doing them on real live people that we were responsible for, and there was still an element of learning on the job that wasn't there previously. And I think that hesitancy to learn new things and the difficulty of learning new things when you're actively engaged in your practice and life also have an impact on why we see this. Equally true in experts and non-experts.
Another thing that occurs to me, and by the way, if you hear cooing or squawking in the background, everyone, I have my young daughter joining us today because she just loves Chuck surgery stories. So, but back
pacifier had nothing to do with it.
No, not at all. So, a follow-up then. I'm reading this book right now. It was written by James Burnham. It's called The Managerial Revolution. People who follow politics will probably be familiar with that. But in the book, he makes the case that society now, it's basically run by managers. It's run by technocrats in different fields and so forth. We don't live under a strictly capitalist system or a strictly communist or whatever. It's a sort of a hybrid of the two. And you have different societies that are governed differently, but it's basically the same model. You have people that you go to. We go to the child psychologist when the kid's acting up, and we go to the doctor reasonably when someone's sick. But then we have these people that are basically charged with tinkering with society and keeping the electricity running, keeping the stoplights and so forth. And I wonder to what extent that phenomenon contributes to this problem, right? Because, we just seem to think as a society, in some cases, as I said, it's reasonable, that, there's experts for that, right? There's these domain-specific people. All they do is turn these dials, and we can trust them to turn the dials. And so I wonder if that collectively might contribute to the problem. Because we turn to people and we say, you're in charge, you're the smart one. And when they can't do it, then there's a problem. What do you think of that possibility?
Well, I think that the problem is that we really don't spend the time training generalists anymore. And I'm sure this is a refrain that other people have said in the past, and that the flip side of that's the ability to specialize and to be very, very efficient and have in medicine good outcomes, is that you no longer see the bigger picture. And the saying is if all you have is a hammer, everything is a nail. And we need more people that have a more complete toolbox, if to do nothing else than to oversee some of the care and raise the question of whether it might be better to turn that screw in with a screwdriver than to continue banging on it with the mallet.
So as we wrap up here, is there a solution to this? And I bring that up because you talk about hubris as just another factor that's contributing to this. And when you're dealing with hubris, you're normally not dealing with people who go, oh, whoops, I made a mistake. And just to give this a little flesh, there was a study in JAMA recently, and I think it would qualify as what you call math magic, right? It's self-reported data. There's lots of statistical footwork, and they were basically trying to say, the extreme interventions we took early in the pandemic worked. But if it was any other topic, if it was RFK attacking vaccines with that methodology, everybody would break out in hives because it was such a crappy study. So in other words, what I'm saying is even today, we still have people in major journals trying,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean? Like we're doubling down, we're backfilling where the holes in our logic were instead of just going, yeah, we made a mistake, our bad.
It's very tough to say that. It's really tough to say that. And now I would argue that it's a little easier for the surgeons than the internists in this particular case on two accounts. First of all, the time frame between being wrong and having a bad outcome is a lot shorter. And that temporal relationship makes it harder to blame somebody else. I mean, you can always blame the patient, who, to begin with, we always will do that. But if the only difference in the situation is you operated on them 3 hours ago, it's tough to completely blame the patient for that. And as a result, surgeons have these weekly morbidity mortality conferences, and you have to get up and confess in front of your peers the things that went wrong. And there's always somebody there that will try and hold your feet to the fire. So yeah, I've always found it's better just to confess and get it out of the way and try and get in front of it very long. And I think that makes for a more thoughtful surgeon, even though that is not the stereotype that we often see in depictions of the swashbuckling nature of my surgical colleagues. But I don't think that a lot of the medical specialties, and now we're talking more specifically about COVID, are particularly trained in that weekly confessional. And I think that makes it increasingly hard to do that. And remember, in these cases, when we're talking about mistakes, we're talking about mistakes that have impacts on other people. They die, they get infections, they're in the hospital longer, they lose parts. These are not simply, oh, I'm bad, let me give you a new receipt.
So fascinating stuff we're dealing with here. And I guess to me the lesson is, everyone's human. And maybe that should encourage us to extend a little bit of grace, but maybe it's a justification for some self-reflection. No matter how many letters you come after your name, you're still human, and it's okay to make mistakes.
Yes, it's better to make mistakes and then say, I made a mistake. And it's certainly important to continue to be open-minded about the areas that we know, especially the areas that we think we are experts in.
Very good. Well, we'll leave it there. Thank you, as always, for joining us. We'll be back next week with another terrific episode of this show, if I may humbly say so. And Dr. Dinnerstein is going to break down the latest science for us. So until then, follow us on social media. It's at ACSH.org. I'm at CamJ English. Send us your comments and questions. We'd love to hear from you. And until then, we'll see you next time.